Hello and welcome to this little chat. This is the face-to-face lecture I'll give on Aristotle, briefly detailing his metaphysics and how they relate to his ethics, with a little bit of modern Aristotelian and Thomistic metaphysics and ethics thrown in. Today's 15 June 2017, and coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio. And let's begin. Okay, Anthony Hopkins is Aristotle in the film Alexander. I don't know where else he's been represented in film. That's the only reason why I threw that in there. Pardon my ignorance. All right, there's a couple cool things on the web. School of Life. I give all these A minus, B minus. Some are better than others on Aristotle. And this crash course philosophy, some of these are pretty good, and so on. They're good for what they are. Little 5, 6, 7 minute snippets of stuff to introduce you, get you acquainted with the philosopher for a second, and then you can jump into the text and really pursue it. All right, we have in this index here at the right the detail between Plato and Aristotle from Raphael's School of Athens. And we have Aristotle, Plato pointing up, where properties, there's different translations of this, where properties exist in the Platonic heavens, unchangeable world of being. Aristotle thought all properties were located in the things themselves. And here are the things we're going to talk about. Substance and properties. We'll look at the four causes briefly. We'll talk about souls and capacities of souls. And we'll talk about relevant issues in ethics. Classical naturalism, categories of people, golden mean, and how the golden mean is subjective but objective. Then we'll look at some critiques and move on. All right. Aristotle's background. So he was born 34 BC up in Stagira, whatever, in Macedonia. Died up in Macedonia. Age of 17, he went to Athens to study under Plato. Then he left the academy after Plato's death. Went to the island of Lesbos, where he met his wife and they had a little girl. I got to go to the island of Lesbos, at least the port there. He tutored Alexander the Great when he was 13 to 16. But then afterwards, Alexander the Great, on his adventures, he would send them back biological specimens from all the different places he went. He had a son, Nicomachus, with his second wife, and we're going to focus mostly on the Nicomachean Ethics, which is named after his son. Over 50% of his work is on the philosophy of biology. Very interesting. I did take a graduate seminar on this, and it was one of my favorite classes in all of graduate school at the University of Cincinnati. He founded the Lyceum in Athens, which is similar to Plato's Academy, and I've got some slides. They found it about 12 years ago in Athens, Greece. Then he left Athens in 323 BC after the death of Alexander the Great and the rise of anti-Macedonian sentiment. Quote, so Athens didn't sin against philosophy twice, the first time, of course, being Socrates. Interestingly, he argued against the evolutionists of his day, Democritus and Empedocles. Evolution was not a new theory that came about in the 19th century. It's been around for 2,600 years or so. And I don't know what that is there. But his thought has had a huge influence on Western philosophy. Scholasticism, the medieval. Then there's kind of revolt against everything Aristotle, everything Thomistic in the 17th century, Descartes and so on. And on my own personal view, I think parts of his philosophy should return to prominence. That's just me talking. So my buddy Greg and I went to see the Lyceum last summer in Greece, but it was closed the day we went. We were like, what? But I think they found this, and they're digging up the new tunnel for the subway before the Olympics 10 years ago or so. All right, but anyway, you can go see that. It's next to a couple nice hotels and so on. Metaphysics, what is the project in general metaphysics? If you remember, I'm going to carve up the four major branches of philosophy into logic, which is about reasoning, epistemology, theory and science of knowledge, ethics, which is about values or the good, morality, rules of right and wrong, and issues of character, or positive character traits, virtues, or negative character traits, vices. Metaphysics relates to these things, but if we go back to Plato, he thought that the job of the philosopher is to carve the world up at the joints. Now, what this means is that we want to find natural demarcations in nature, in metaphysics, that are places to dismember the parts, to dismember wholes. What is a whole? What are the parts of a whole? What are the parts and properties of the whole? That's what we're trying to do in metaphysics. So, yeah, it's a reference to being a butcher. When you carve a turkey or chicken, you cut the animal with the joints, not in the middle of the bones. And the same thing, we want to have natural categories. So we think that persons as biological individuals are good categories for most people. And the species concept is a good one, even though there's some debate over what the heck a species is. So we're going to try to find real, natural categories to talk about reality. Ontology, part of metaphysics, is study of being. So I might use the word ontological is a more specific subset of metaphysics. Okay, substances and properties. What the heck are these things? We want to talk about accidental and essential properties, natural and non-natural properties, primary and secondary properties, as they've been defined historically. Whether or not these are legitimate distinctions, you be the judge. All right, substances. A substance, ousia, is the principal category, and substances, the primary things, are concrete individuals, like an individual man or an individual horse. So biological organisms, they're going to be taken as the number one examples of substances. So they're the ultimate substances of predication. That's what a substance is. So if something is predicated of something else has that property. So substances are the things in which characters or properties inhere. The substance frog has the property of green. So greenness is predicated of this particular frog here. The substance is a primary reality, something that can exist alone without need of anything else from the outside. Now, Buddhists will deny that such things exist, especially the Madhyamika Prasangika view, as far as I understand it. But forget that for now. I like to call things a metaphysical pincushion. If we imagine properties or qualities of an object are like pins, so greenness in a frog is like a pin sticking into the thing. In fact, in class I used to bring Play-Doh and popsicle sticks and pipe cleaners to class to try to illustrate what substances are. Now, people would play with it too much, and so I quit doing that. All right. So, for Aristotle, material objects or substances are composed of both matter and form. So a frog, a bronze statue, hippo have both matter and form. But that's not as important as what we are trying to get clear on as a substance. So a substance is a, quote, a whole that is a deep unity of properties, parts, and capacities. So a substance is a whole that's a deep unity of properties, parts, and capacities. So think about Tinker Toys, where one wheel has different colored sticks in it. And also, for many philosophers, properties are universals. Now, there's debate over this between nominalists and extreme nominalists, but let's just assume they're universals for the sake of argument here. So properties are universals. These are things that may be in more than one thing at once. So, for instance, redness is something that this chair can have here, or The shirt I'm wearing right now is red, has the property of redness. Redness can show up in billions of different places on the earth. Rationality. If humans have this trait, then it shows up on at least 2 or 3 people on the planet. Humanness. What are there, 7 billion people now? So humanness shows up on every living human organism, this property. Whiteness shows up on this sugar cube over here. Whiteness shows up on my PowerPoint right here. Whiteness shows up on this marshmallow and on the lettering on my shirt, the property of whiteness. So these properties or qualities are universal and they can show up in many different places. So let's think about a frog as a substance. For Aristotle, a frog is a substance, and it's represented by this oval below. Or if I had it, it'd be Plato. So it has various properties sticking in the substance. Let's list them. 4-legged. Property of greenness, or being green. This little guy's property being red-eyed. Also, he has the power, capacity to climb, this ability. He's got a length, 1 inch, weight, 1 ounce. He's got a mass, and so on. But you can't see the substance of the frog. All you see are these properties. So Aristotle would say, yeah, you can't see the substance of the frog, but you can see the properties. The frog's substance or soul is something that you cannot see. Because what is it? It is a whole that is a deep unity of properties, parts, and capacities. So for a historical example, we can look at the early Christian church in the formulation of the concept of the Trinity. So I was talking with a student the other day about this. I mean, it depends on your view. If Christianity is true, then God providentially waited until Aristotelian metaphysics was present in order to reveal his triune nature. Okay? You had to have Aristotle to understand a deep understanding of the triune God, the Trinity. Now, or you might think, as some of my friends think, that Christianity is an invention, and so it was just invented with this Greek metaphysical terminology. So let's look at the Nicene Creed on the following slide, and we'll note the use of the philosophical concept of substance. All right, Nicene Creed, 381 AD. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible. And in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of the Father before all worlds, God of God, light of light, very God of God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, by whom all things were made, who for us men and for our salvation came down from heaven, and was incarnate by the Holy Spirit of the Virgin Mary, and was made man, and was crucified also for us under Pontius Pilate. He suffered and was buried, and the 3rd day he rose again, according to the Scriptures, and ascended into heaven, and sitteth on the right hand of the Father, and so on. But you see that. Now, Aristotle distinguished between primary and secondary substance, but let's just forget that for now. Jesus, the Father, and the Holy Spirit share one substance. So normal living human organisms are of one substance, but with one person. The triune God is one substance, but 3 persons. So these Aristotelian concepts came in handy for the Christian church. All right, let's talk about properties or qualities. They can be degreed or absolute or real. So if we think about the property of being pregnant, is that a degreed property? What about baldness? What about sobriety? In class, I'd ask you to talk about these in groups, but basically I would say you're either pregnant or you're not. If you have a Clear Blue Easy device and it says X, Y, it says whatever for we're pregnant, then you're pregnant. If it says not, you're not. Now you're pregnant or you're not. That's humans are. There's no 10% pregnant. Baldness is different. You can be 1% bald, 2%, 100% bald. I'm about 85% bald. I can grow a mean horseshoe right now. I wear a comb over, but I'm not. In fact, a few years ago, I went to this girl, my hair designer, and I said, I want to start me a comb over today. And she said, no, I have a moral problem with that. So they're hard to get these days. Sobriety. Now, some people are going to say people are more or less sober, so it's a degreed property. And Aristotle, some people argue there aren't properties such as drunkenness. People are more or less sober. There's none of these negative properties like drunkenness. All right, properties also could be accidental and essential. So essential properties are the properties essential to the kind of thing that it is. So rationality for human beings, capacity to swim for a fish. Accidental properties are non-essential properties that can come and go and change and won't change the kind of thing that it is. So your skin color, whiteness, brownness, greenness for human beings. So if you're a green-skinned baby, and you go to a tanning bed and you get orange skin or polka-dotted skin, then that's just you're changing. Michael Jackson, his skin color changed, but he still remained the same person, and so on. You get same with hair color. You have hair as a kid, you lose your hair if you're bald, you cut your hair, you grow your hair, you color your hair, you're still the same person, that type of thing. So, Chad Johnson, Andy Dalton, or J.J. Watt, the Red Rifle from Katy, Texas right there, who is talking to Ben Roethlisberger, who used to be a guy I liked when he played for Miami University, the greatest university on the planet. But then he joined the enemy, Pittsburgh Steelers. So Chad Ochocinco Johnson, at the time he had this blonde mohawk. That's not an essential property of who he is. He could shave that off, he's still the same person. All right. Good thing to discuss is, what about your sexual orientation? Is that an essential property of you? Now, I have a controversial position, according to some of my students, but I do not think that this is necessarily an essential property. So if an alien came down and microwaved all human beings, and we switched and had some different sexual orientation, I don't necessarily think that would change the core of who we are. But you be the judge. This comes up in debates on whether or not homosexuality, transgenderism, these kind of things are dysfunctional, or is only the dysphoria or dealing with it dysfunctional. Let's bring it up on the discussion board and let's talk about it. Oh, I guess there's cases here. Let me read these. So imagine there's a guy, homosexual, takes a pill in the year 2030 and increases his heterosexual desires and decreases his homosexual desires. And then he falls in love with his best friend, his beard, marries her, and then has 3 kids and 50 years of marriage. Is this good or bad, happy or sad? Neither. People will be divided, so we'll have to discuss this. Some people see that this is a tragedy, that you should be with whatever sexual orientation you're with, that type of thing. But what if a guy was attracted to children and he takes a pill and he stops being attracted to children, and he's either homosexual or heterosexual adult? Most of us might say that might be a good thing. All right. And if someone's only sexually attracted to rats, I got that from an old professor, and took a pill, and all of a sudden I was attracted to human beings, a lot of us would say, well, that's more natural, that's properly functioning. You be the judge. All right. This is me a few years ago at this hostel I was staying in Berlin, Germany. When I visited my sister who was there on a business trip, I was living in France, and I loved it. There is a David Hasselhoff bar with all this stuff. So, quick quiz. For Aristotle, was drunk a property of Hasselhoff? God bless him. He's now clean and sober. And I saw him in some video. Was it Brad Paisley last week? Baywatch star, Knight Rider. At the time there, David Hasselhoff, he was just more or less sober to a certain degree. All right, so yeah, drunk is not a real natural property. It's a deficiency of rationality or sobriety. St. Augustine will also take this. He'll define evil as the deficiency of the good. So for him, evil is not a real thing. So some Christian theologians, Islamic theologians, Jewish theologians, they would prefer have God not to be the creator of evil if it's a really existing thing. So it's much better to have things that have deficiencies of good. All right. Primary and secondary properties. You can skip this or pause it. I think there's quiz questions on it. So you can learn it that way. All right. It's transubstantiation. I thought this was dumb when I was a kid, but once you start to study the switching of the substances, it makes sense. So those of you who've gone to Sunday school, Catholic or Lutheran, Orthodox, whomever believes this, what people believe who believe in this doctrine, what's switched in the Eucharist is the underlying substratum, the non-physical, invisible substance that you cannot see, while the properties, which are the properties or qualities of wine and bread, they remain the same. So the substances of bread and wine are switched with substances of Christ's flesh and blood. The accidents, properties or qualities, remain unchanged. So the blood tastes like wine, and the flesh looks and tastes like bread, but the substances have changed underneath. So here we have bread and wine. And then we have blood and flesh that has the appearance of wine and bread. It looks the same, but the non-physical part of it is what is switched. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, get on the discussion board, email me, let's talk about it. All right. You can pause this and read this. But basically, yes, the underlying substance has changed. The accidents remain the same. I mean, this was helpful to me. I always thought this was just the dumbest doctrine in the world. And now I'm like, you know what? This could be true. I'm not sure if it is or not, but it's at least possibly true. All right, let's look at biological organisms. Classical naturalism, and one formulation, we'll look at this. It's different than modern naturalism or scientific atheism. Classical naturalism says we can judge things from healthiest to unhealthiest. So Aristotle would go down, he'd take a look at the mollusks and the invertebrates, and he'd line them up, and he'd say, all right, this one's healthiest, least healthy, these guys are in the middle. So he thought that you could line things up on a continuum, healthy to unhealthy. Plants and animals. He also thought you could do it with governments. You could have North Korea, United States of America, Cuba, Venezuela, Canada. Line up all these governments and you can judge them healthiest to unhealthiest. Same thing with families. You can get all these different families, line them up and say, wow, you know what, this family here is really dysfunctional and unhealthy. This family over here is much healthier, and so on. Same thing with individuals. You could line up and look at your own friendships. Say you have 50 friendships in your life. You can analyze those to see on a continuum from healthiest to unhealthiest, and so on. And a lot of people don't believe you can do this thing anymore. All right, biological organisms. Historical note, for Aristotle, all the species in the world are fixed. So evolution isn't possible in principle. And he gave some practical arguments against Democritus, Empedocles, and the evolutionists of his day. So the job of the scientist is to discover the essential definitions of a thing. This is classical naturalism in action. And Aristotle thought we could use our reason, and a scientist can do this by simple observation. She only needs to go down to the ocean to examine different worms. And with a little work, it'll be evident how to distinguish the healthy from the unhealthy worm. All right, I should do this on the discussion board. But this is fun to do in class. Can you do this? So play the classical naturalist, and I'd have you get into groups, but try to line up and pick 5 or 10 families from healthiest to unhealthiest. And these are all suggestions from people and students in my classes. American Dad, Cleveland Show, Rick Grimes' Family, Walking Dead, the Tanners, Full House, Duggar Family, the Four Modern Family families, Waltons, Sopranos, Davy and Goliath. Me and my niece used to watch that. Little People, Big World, the Robertsons, Duck Dynasty, Pablo Escobar, Huxtable, Simpsons, Connors, Winslow, Adams, Brady Bunch, Clumps, Griswolds, the Foreman, the Morgans from Dexter, and so on. Ozzy Osbourne. So, after you do that, the response to that is this. Peter Griffin would say, hey, who are you? Who do you think you are? Who are you to judge? And put the Griffins at the bottom of the list. Oh, I forgot the Kardashians. Everybody likes to mention those. So, the question is, on what rational basis can you judge the Simpsons or Griffin families less functional or healthy as the Dunphy or the Duck Dynasty Robertson family? How can you make this list at all? What would Aristotle, a classical naturalist, say? Aristotle would say, hey, these families are healthier and happier. I don't care if these other families think they're happy. No, they're yelling, they're mean to each other. And if you look at this, wow, the Robertsons, they have more fun, they goof off, and so on. Versus this family, the Sons of Anarchy family. I've never seen the show. But say a family of over there in ISIS. So an ISIS family. Hey, yeah, we're going to behead some people on Sunday. They're less healthy than the Obamas or even the Trumps or whatever. All right. Now, can we do what Aristotle thought we can do? Can we judge natures, which are also called Aristotelian formal causes, on the way humans ought to be? Can we judge hoarding as functional or dysfunctional? I love that my aunt, she says, hey, it's not OCD, it's OCO, obsessive compulsive order, and she'll point to, hey, look, I'm much more effective in this and this and this and this, and this is order, this is not a disorder, so it should be cut out of DSM-4. Who are you to judge this as a disorder or not a disorder? And what about someone who's sexually attracted to rats and only rats? Can we judge that as functional or dysfunctional? So this is going to be a question that's been a huge debate with the DSM in psychology. And yeah, wow, who are you to judge and say homosexuality is dysfunctional? So they throw it out. Transgender issues, hey, it's not dysfunctional anymore. It's just if you struggle with it. So Aristotle would say, no, these are obviously dysfunctional. It's not just if you're struggling with it. This is not the way human beings were designed to be. So you judge if Aristotle's right or wrong. Also, if it's dysfunctional and unhealthy, necessarily immoral, there might be a lot of cases where being dysfunctional or unhealthy is not actually immoral. On Aristotle's view, my own view, all of us have hundreds of different areas of dysfunction and unhealthiness. So nobody can call each other out and say, hey, look at me, I'm perfect. No. None of you guys out there are perfect. Everybody, on my view, is a mess. And everybody on this planet could use a therapist or 10 to try to work on some of their issues. Right, Phil Dunphy? All right, switch it up. What is an explanation for Aristotle? He thought there is 4 causes. Material, efficient, formal, and final. Well, real quick, Aristotle distinguished between artifacts and natural entities in nature. So some things are artifacts, some things are natural entities. Waterfalls are natural entities. Desks are artifacts. They're artificial, created by humans by design. Empire State Building, that is an artifact. A rock wall, you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, build a retaining wall, that's artificial. A river, that's an artifact. It's a natural entity. Canal, that is an artifact. Tornado, natural entity. Millennium Falcon, my car, 91 Crown Vic, that is an artifact, awesome artifact. Cloud is a natural entity. All right, scientific atheism. This is interesting. So on some naturalistic views of famous scientific atheists, they argue that there's no such thing as an artifact because everything is natural. Human beings are part of nature just like clouds and rivers. So everything humans do, which humans are ultimately puppets of nature, and everything humans do are as natural. So climate change and global warming is 100% natural. Just because you say it's man-made doesn't mean it's not natural. Because human beings are just puppets of nature living out their lives. So this laptop that I'm looking at, these headphones I have on, these are just as natural as the sunset I'm looking at over this pond, which is part artificial, well, artificially built. So yeah, to think about what humans are on the worldview of scientific atheism or naturalism. If humans are just as natural as lava flows and rivers, and the actions of humans are just as natural as rivers of volcanic eruptions, everything, what is this? Is this correct? So everything that parts of nature produce are just as natural as everything else. Forgive the grammar. So there are no artifacts. Man-made global warming or climate change makes no sense because humans are just as natural as anything else. The factory is just as natural as a cloud, a tornado, or a volcano erupting. Okay. Aristotle's view of explanation, the four causes. Okay, material cause, stuff that was formed to produce a thing. Efficient cause, substance that provided the property P. Formal cause, essential definition. Final cause is that for the sake of which, the teleological goal. A telos in Greek is a goal or an end, or that for the sake of which something acts. So, the telos of why do you bring an umbrella to school? So you don't get wet. The telos is to avoid getting wet. Let's go over each of these. Material, efficient, formal, and final cause. Material cause, the matter out of which the thing is made. In the case of an artifact like a bronze statue, it's going to be bronze. All right. So material cause, matter out of which the thing's made. Artifacts, bronze, biological organisms, oak tree, semen of a male. The female just cooked the organism. So that's what he thought. The male deposits the biological material in the female, and that's where it cooks. Women, he thought, were not as rational as men because the semen cooked too long inside their mother's wombs. That we know is false. All right. Efficient cause, this is most similar to physical causation. So examples of the efficient cause of a thing and artifacts, the efficient cause of a bronze statue is a sculptor who sculpts. Organisms, the efficient cause of a frog is the frog's parents. So God, if she exists, is the efficient cause of the universe with no material cause. God, if God exists, created the world ex nihilo, or out of nothing. So tangent causation, we'll skip this. Formal cause, this is the part of scientific explanation for Aristotle, named the kind of thing something is. For organisms, it's described as the nature of a thing. So frog nature, human nature, oak tree nature. Scallops have scallop nature, eagles have eagle nature. So for artifacts, it's described the kind of thing that it is. So a bronze statue of Zeus, chair, car, cup, book, etc. I've got my Asics trainers on right now. Shoeness. Final cause, as we mentioned before, this is the teleology, this is the goal-directedness. Telos is the end or goal. So the design argument in philosophy of religion is called the teleological argument. So the telos of an artifact is in the mind of the designer as well. What is the purpose the hammer was made, or the house was made, or the iPhone was made? So the telos of a biological organism is to flourish according to the kind of thing that it is. It's formal cause, it's nature. So a flourishing oak tree is a healthy, full-branched tree. A flourishing frog is one without defects. A flourishing human is one who has developed moral character and practical wisdom and the ability to reason well and the ability to have great friendships and relationships with family and to be a great citizen, a political animal. So yes, the telos of a human being is to flourish according to human nature. So this state will actually be one of deep happiness, or in the Greek, eudaimonia, or literally to have a good demon. Now, why might Charles Darwin's naturalistic theory of evolution eliminate these from biology? So Darwin eliminated formal and final causes from explanation in biology. Even though if you read a biological textbook, most of them sneak in formal and final causes, even though they shouldn't. So Aristotle, this was part of his argument against the evolutionists of his day. He thought you could not explain everything about biology unless you have formal and final causes. And Darwin tried to explain away the appearance of design and purposes in nature. And just keep an eye out for this. Watch how often naturalists forget this and are inconsistent by talking about natures and functions and purposes in natures. They'll use teleological and language. All right. So we already mentioned this. There are no artifacts. Nazi death camps are just as natural as lava flows, destroying towns. Oh, this is an interesting thing. Can we evaluate worldviews? Now, personally, this is a reason why I find scientific atheism or naturalism to be implausible. That, wow, if naturalism leads me to say that climate change is just as natural as anything else, and that humans are just puppets of nature, just matter moving in fields of force, and that Nazi death camps are just as natural as lava flows, then I'm just going to say, you know what, that's a strike against that worldview. All right, if we want to pause this, 4 causes in organisms, 4 causes in artifacts, you want to pause it and read this, go ahead. In class, I'd have you pick an artifact and organism, write down the 4 causes of each. But you're home on your computer, so you can do that if you want. And email me, and I'll let you know if you have questions. So yes, thanks to Charles Darwin, biology does not have formal and final causes anymore. Why? Because everything is in flux. Everything is in change. So there's no way that things ought to be. Just things are the way they are at a certain time, and they'll change and modify. Everything is changing. So that's why it is hard to make sense of any kind of dysfunction. Things just are. So you might find statistical norms, but that's about the best you can do, on my view. But I got a buddy who wrote a dissertation on this subject. Email me and let's talk about it. All right, what in the world is a soul? What do you think the soul is and isn't? Even if you think they don't exist, how do people use the word in our culture today? Do you think there's evidence that the soul exists? Now, most of us are just soul ignorant. We've gotten so dumb ignorant in the last 300 years of what souls are supposed to be and the powers and capacities and what people thought they could do, that we just throw around the world a word that we don't know what we're talking about. All right. Souls of organisms. Okay, 300 years ago, before Descartes, everybody thought that organisms had souls, that plants, animals, everything had soul. But with the rise of the mechanistic philosophy, we've slowly cut souls out of all things. Now, for Aristotle, all living organisms had souls, or special types of substances with additional powers and capacities. For Aristotle, the soul, which in Latin is called de anima, in the title of his book on this issue, is not what we would think of as a soul in the 21st century. It's just not the thing that goes to heaven. It is a unique metaphysical entity with special powers or capacities and potentialities. So human souls, for the Christians, thought that Well, the intellect as well for Aristotle. Human souls might have spiritual capacities or capacities of the intellect that for Aristotle might be on live on after death. So that's one controversial part of metaphysics and Aristotle about the possibility of life after death, since the intellect is a part of the soul that is apart from the brain. And later philosophers like Thomas Aquinas use biblical revelation to argue that the immaterial soul proceeds to the afterlife after death. If you read the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 5, you'll see that he endorses a substance dualist view, or the view that human beings are not just physical, they're non-physical entities. All right, this is kind of a modified, modernized version. We're going to talk about first order, second order, third order, fourth order capacities. So souls and capacities, potentialities. This view is a modernized Aristotelianism and Thomism after Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, and it's represented and defended by J.P. Moreland, Scott B. Ray, former professors of mine, and the excellent book, Body and Soul, by InterVarsity Press, The Crisis in Ethics. So these guys, I love that book because it does metaphysics and also talks about modern issues in ethics. So check it out, especially if you're going into the medical field, going to be a nurse or a doc or something like that. All right. So higher order means first order capacities. Lower order is second order. All right. Capacity, potentiality versus actuality. So when you're walking, your capacity in your soul is actually actualized. You're using that capacity. It's not just a power. It's a power that's being exercised. Now, when we aren't walking, our souls have the first order capacity to walk. When we're using that power, we're using the power. When we're not using it, then it's just a capacity. For Aristotle, the souls of organisms had tens of thousands of capacities within them. So as a zygote, all of our capacities are present in our soul, but they are lower order. So third order, fourth order, second order. But as the human organism develops, different parts of the soul grow, and these capacities are reached, first order capacities. So for modern Thomists and Aristotelians, the souls of organisms create the body. They'll say they'll use the DNA molecule to create the body. All right. So capacities. The things we have the capacity to do now are called first order capacities. But we can also have capacity to have capacities. Those are the things that we have the capacity to develop the capacity. Those are second order. So most of us do not speak Russian. Очень хорошо. Молодец. Привет. До свидания. But most of us have the ability to study Russian and eventually develop that first order capacity to speak Russian. Okay? We can also lose our first order capacities to do things. If I get hit by a bus, I lose my first order capacity to walk. It might take me, a few months or years, or maybe I'll never ever gain that capacity to walk again. But we can never lose our lower order capacities. Those are in our soul. And we have those forever. All right, I think I asked you on the discussion board to give an example. So for yourself, think of a first order capacities for yourself. Now, don't make it abstract. Be like, wow, I had the second order capacity to speak French when I was 4 years old. But after I learned French in junior high and lived in France for a year, I developed that first order capacity to speak French. Talk about you. Talk about a real power. Don't just say language. Talk about real capacities you developed and move from a lower order to higher order. Sound good? All right. A side note, potentialities aren't fictions. They're real powers that exist. Some people get confused by this word potentialities. So sometimes I don't even like to use that. That's why I don't like to use the word potential and to use the word capacity, where it's a real actual power that you have, like kinetic energy. It exists. It's real. It's not potential type of thing. All right. I think we already went over this. Demise of Aristotelian philosophy. Science that rejects formal and final causes. Again, start to look. Why do squirrels bark? To warn the herd? No. Darwin's dangerous idea, as Daniel Dennett would say, is that there is no teleology. There's no goal-directedness. There's just efficient causes and material causes. There's no formal and final causes. So just look at how often naturalists or scientific atheists sneak in these terms, and if they have a good reason to do so. All right? Email me if you're confused on this. I'm blowing through this. And if you don't understand why species are not fixed on Darwinism, email me. They're always changeable. Everything's changing. Every speciation came out of one single-celled organism. All right, enough of that stuff. Aristotle's ethics. Again, the classical naturalism, he thought we could line up people and say, hey, this guy's virtuous, he's got these healthy traits, he's generous, he's kind, he's courageous. Wow, look at Tuffer over here. He's weak, he's selfish, he's mean. And wow, this guy over here who's Andy Dalton, the Red Rifle, he's generous, courageous. This is how people ought to be. They shouldn't be like Tuffer, they should be like Andy Dalton in these areas. How do we know? We just line people up and we look at how happy they are, how functional they are. So, a lot of people are going to say, whoa, 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 Mr. Aristotle, who are you to tell us the way, what's healthy and unhealthy, just based on your own reasons sitting there? Tuffer over here thinks that, hey, he's selfish, he's a Unabomber living in the woods, he's happier, and he puts his foot down. And forget Andy Dalton, and even think he's happier. Forget you, Aristotle, for thinking Andy Dalton's better than I am, or healthier than I am. All right, there's Raphael's School of Athens. All right, let's talk about the golden mean. This is a question you have on the discussion board. You have my grandma here. She passed away a couple of years ago, right before her 102nd birthday. But there she is with my sister's Chihuahua about 4 or 5 years ago, taking a nap in Mason, Ohio. There is my boy Rambo. Aristotle's golden mean. So let's do a little bit of ethics. You have some major theories. Now, relativists say there is no objective truth about ethics. That moral values are either relative to cultures, so 51%, the majority decides whether or not abortion is right or wrong, or morality is relative to individuals. Each individual gets to determine whether or not beheading a Christian is right or wrong, or kicking a puppy, whether it's right or wrong. Now, 99.999% of humans in history think relativism is just a joke. It's false. There are obviously moral facts. And to show relativism is false, you just need one event in history that's either objectively right or wrong. So D-Day, was that courageous or not? Or kicking of a puppy? Or, a senior in high school being mean to a kindergartner out of spite? Let's just choose that one. That's just wrong no matter what. And if you think it's wrong, then you're messed up. So there's different views. There's different objectivist or moral realist views about how we come up with and ground right and wrong. You have utilitarianism, which is consequentialism, which is the ends justifies the means. So it's like it doesn't matter how we get there. All we care about is consequences. So Harry S. Truman, President Truman, used consequentialist reasoning when he decided to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They calculated, okay, if the Americans have to invade Japan, they're going to lose 500,000 to 1 million American soldiers. All right. And how many Japanese will die? 10 million Japanese will die as a result of an American invasion. So that was decision 1. 11 million people die if there's an invasion. Decision B is drop 2 atomic bombs and then get the Japanese surrender. Okay, if 2 atomic bombs are dropped, you have 150,000 Japanese who are burned to death and suffer from cancer in the coming decades. But if you compare the suffering and death of 150,000 people versus 11 million, it's a no-brainer. If you're a utilitarian consequentialist, you drop the bombs. Now, Kant says, no. You never use people as a means to an end. We follow these rules no matter what. So, in our debates, a good tension in all movies, in all these movies, is between utilitarians and Kantians. You see people who want to break the rules or break the law for the greater good. Okay? But there's always deontology, duty, following rules. That's often always in tension with consequentialists. So we'll see this today in our political philosophy. You have some people who think we should break the Constitution and go against the Constitution for the greater good. Supreme Court of the United States, you have Stephen Breyer explained beautifully years ago how many liberal justices, hey, it's more important that we worry about consequences and not just whether or not something is constitutional or not. It's whether or not it's a good law, and so on. Scalia and other deontologists, they disagree and think that, no, we should just be originalists, so on. All right. This is for your discussion board post, Aristotle's golden mean. Aristotle thought that each virtue sat on a mean between the two vices, a vice of excess and a vice of deficiency. So, for example, you have a vice of excess, rashness, or stupidity. You have on the other end of it the vice of deficiency, which is cowardice, being a coward. And in the middle, the Goldilocks philosophy, there's a virtue, the positive character trait, being courageous. Okay, and that's the decision you want to do. So I'm going to give you a case on the midterm and final where you're going to have to determine 3 actions and then the vice of excess associated with one action, and name that vice, name the other vice, that alternative, and then name that virtue and the alternative in the middle. All right. My text is in the car. Let me just pause here. Let me keep going, and then I'll work through the text in the next lecture. Here's a list: vices of excess, vice of deficiency, and the golden mean. Some examples here. I'm going to pause it and look at this to get some ideas. By the way, this is from Larry Jost, professor at the University of Cincinnati. He says that for everyone, Aristotle, the golden mean is subjective but subjective. So subjective just means person dependent. Objective is universal. But the golden mean is subjective but objective. So every person is different, but there's an objective right or wrong for every person. In other words, the virtues are subjective but objective. For example, consider the virtue of courage. Everyone should be a person of courage for Aristotle. My grandmother passed away in May 2015, but when she was alive, she could exhibit cowardice, stupidity, or courage. The 34-year-old Green Beret, Johnny Rambo, can exhibit both the vices or the virtue, courage, as well. But the point is this: courage is going to be very different for both Rambo and my grandma, given physical stature, training, etc. So imagine I'm getting beat up by neo-Nazis on Fountain Square in Cincinnati, Ohio, and both my grandma and Rambo are watching. What would be courageous for my grandma is to shout for help, or she was in a wheelchair, wheeling to the phone to dial 911. That actually would be an exhibition of cowardice for Rambo. Courage for Rambo would go over there to stop the violence. Stupidity or rashness or for my grandma would be to run out and try to stop the violence. All right, does that make sense? I got a lot of videos of me and my grandma. All right, so everybody has their own golden mean, but depending on our gifts, talents, physical stature, it's different. You can pause it in here. Take a look, just get ideas of moral virtues and vices. If we were doing group work, I'd have you guys do a case, but actually you're going to do this on the discussion board. So choose your favorite movie, Hunger Games, Iron Man, Lord of the Rings, something, and to do on the discussion board. Or pick something from the news, current events. Alright, quick mention of character. Alright, a person's character is a current state of actualization of the moral capacities in the soul. In other words, it's a list of virtues and vices of any given human being at a time. So all humans have the lower order capacity to be a truly flourishing and happy human, but to do this we need to be completely virtuous, and our character is a particular measure of how far along we are to reaching our telos as virtuous persons. Boom. Your character comes from a fixed state. What are you virtuous in? What are you continent in? What are you vicious in? That type of thing. Alright. Phronesis. Practical wisdom. They come back in Ethics 1142a. He says this: whereas young people become accomplished in geometry and mathematics and wise within those limits, prudent young people do not seem to be found. The reason is that prudence is concerned with particulars as well as universals. Particulars become known from experience, but a young person lacks experience since some length of time is needed to produce it. So Aristotle thought a necessary condition of being virtuous is having practical wisdom, or phronesis. This type of wisdom involves the ability to reason and apply universal truths to a particular situation. The person of practical wisdom will understand eudaimonia and how to pursue it. So if you want to mention this on the discussion board, bring it up. All right, for me, there's a beautiful sunset right now here in Cincinnati. Let me just tell you that. All right, it reminds me of when I was down in St. Pete, Florida as a freshman. And there was a new guy came in, and he says, hey, I'm a transfer. I don't know anybody. You guys want to drink a six-pack, get a six-pack and hang out. And I was such a teetotaler and against drinking, I just laughed at his face. And I said, no way. I was with my buddy Danny. And in hindsight, that hurt his feelings. Mike Leparco, I'm sorry, buddy. But the guy just wanted to hang out. He didn't really want to drink beer. He just wanted to hang out, get to know it, and goof off. And so I couldn't see that. So I took that rule, don't drink, and I ended up not being a person of practical wisdom in that situation. So that took time for me to realize, it's kind of George Costanza, if you know that one about coffee. All right. Continence and incontinence. Pleasure. All right, we just kind of want to go over these guys real quick. The virtuous person has knowledge of the right and wrong, has the ability or power to do it, and also takes pleasure in doing the right activity. The continent person has knowledge, has the ability, but does not enjoy doing it. The incontinent person has knowledge, but no ability to do the right thing. The vicious person has no knowledge or no ability, but the ability to learn. So, I got to add this discussion board. No, I think I did. We have a virtuous win. So me and Krispy Kremes. I am incontinent. So if you put some hot Krispy Kremes fresh from the oven in front of me, I know the wrong thing to do is to eat all those things in the next 2 minutes. But guess what? I don't have the ability to refuse. I'll just eat all 12 of those things. Okay? Now, if I was continent, I could look at those 12 Krispy Kremes and be like, I know I shouldn't eat them. I'm not going to. But I'm like, I would hate life. I'd be unhappy. The virtuous person, he actually can look at those Krispy Kremes and say, I'm going to take pleasure and be able to resist the urge to eat all these Krispy Kremes. Or my buddy, as he says, he's into fitness. Fitness whole pizza in my mouth. So, All right. Me and Jessica Alba in Vegas. She knows she should not kiss me, but she's going to have a hard time resisting. All right, that was dumb. Aristotelian habituation in the original Karate Kid. I usually play this clip. Wax on, wax off, and so on. But basically, parents, you can't force your kids to take pleasure in doing something. You can't force them to be virtuous. All you can do is to give them the ability to be continent, give them the power to do the right thing, and the knowledge of the right thing. But, so, for Aristotle and others, like eventually, hopefully, if you become virtuous, it'll click. Something someday will click and you'll move from point A, just being able to do it grudgingly, to B, oh, you actually enjoy it. This takes time and habituation. Habituation is just being forced to do this habit over and over again. All right, so for me, a quick example was swimming. I moved to California many, many moons ago, and my buddy, I used to beat him at 5Ks and 10Ks, Jesse, and he's like, I'm sick of this. I swam in college. We're going to start doing triathlon. I'm like, what? I'm like, all right. My school, Biola University, had a pool, so I started getting the pool. I hated swimming so much, I couldn't even do it. I was incontinent. So I had to have 3 swim partners to swim. I had to meet them, and they had to go to the pool. And I'd be praying every day, hey, I hope such and such, Chris is not going to want to swim today, so she's going to go hang out. And Matt, Chris Glass, Matt Robertson. Like, Matt, come on, man. But they were always disciplined more than I was, and they would take me to the pool. Let me tell you, something happened. I remember at the 8th month mark, I was training for Escape from Alcatraz triathlon. Something happened in that pool where I was not dreading it. I actually enjoyed it. I got my stroke down, and I was just able to just swim without thinking, and I could pray and sing as I sing in my mind as I swam. And I didn't need my swim partners anymore. I was disciplined enough to do it myself. So I moved from incontinent with my partners to continent, didn't enjoy it, then boom, something happened, it clicked. I became virtuous. I actually enjoyed training. So this example came from John Coe at Biola University, or Rosemead School of Psychology, that produced Henry Cloud and John Townsend. All right, he taught me this one. So he says, all right, parents, you know you got to train your kids to be nice to grandma and love on her. So every day after Sunday dinner, you make your 4-year-old child hug and kiss grandma. But the 4-year-old hates it because grandma's got a big hairy lip and smells funny. But the child learns to do it out of fear because mom's going to punish him, take something away, or spank him or something at home if he doesn't. So a few years later, the kid is able to do it, but still doesn't like it. Grandma's got a hairy lip, smells funny, but the kid's able to do it. Then all of a sudden, years later, something magical happens and it clicks in his soul. And this kid who's grown up a little bit is like, you know what? My grandma has a beard and she smells funny, but I love my grandma. I love her, and I love hugging her and kissing her every day after I leave because I'm showing affection and she enjoys that, and we are a family, and this is just awesome, and so what? And so the kid becomes virtuous thanks to his parent giving him that habit, giving him the knowledge, making him incontinent and then incontinent, and then the virtue comes later, if it comes. Make sense? All right. We can also talk about this if you want to bring it up. The parents, you must start habituating your kids into continence at an early age, or else they'll be lost. So if you look at feral children and all these attachment disorders, my friend adopted a little girl from Russia and just had this attachment disorder, and these things can be awful. So yeah, there's no sending your child to school at age 6 to be parented. But what do you think? To what degree is Aristotle right? You might say this with feral kids. If you saw Nell, Jodie Foster, and so on. All right. A few more things. Aristotle versus the Enlightenment. So unlike the classical liberals of the Enlightenment, the man on the deserted island has ethical questions at each moment of the day. So Enlightenment theorists, ethics was kind of boiled down to just morality of right and wrong with regards to other people. Kant was a little different, but yeah, what's right or wrong? It's just with other people. So if you're the last man on earth, then you don't have any moral questions for a lot of philosophers. But not Aristotle. Because Aristotle, for eudaimonia and happiness, you have to move towards your soul's telos, your final cause, which is virtue and flourishing, moral, intellectual, and so on. And so for Aristotle, his ethical theory is dependent upon his metaphysics. His view of the soul of human nature and teleology is all tied up in his ethics. So when Enlightenment philosophers rejected Aristotle's metaphysics, his ethics went as well. It was interesting. In the 20th century, there was a surge to get back to virtue ethics. Philippa Foot, other people. Shoot, what's her name? That big woman. Larger woman. Anyway. But there was often a move to do this without the metaphysics of the soul. And for my PhD application paper, I critiqued Paul Churchland, who's a limitative materialist, and his appeal to virtue theory. And I'm like, whoa, dude. How are you going to do this without metaphysics to back this up? All right. So this is kind of a caricature, but let's do it anyway. For the Enlightenment theorists, pursue happiness however you want. Forget Aristotle. So if you want to waste your talents, go ahead. If you want to smoke reefer and drink Schlitz in your van down by the river and not develop your talents, that's fine. So what was that guy? Oh, man. He played for Texas and then went to Miami Dolphins. He just said, I'm sick of playing pro football. I just want to smoke weed. And so he quit and smoked weed. And I was like, yeah, that's the Enlightenment, guys. If you don't want to develop your talents as a football player, do it. You want to be a family man? Do it. Want to be a workaholic? Do it. Want to be sober? Do it. Be an alcoholic? Do it. Want to be a recluse hermit in the hills with no friends? Have lots of friends. So on. You decide your life, no right or wrong. If you're the last man on earth. Now, if you saw Good Will Hunting, you saw the different view. That, you know what? So Ben Affleck and Aristotle would agree, said it's immoral for Matt Damon to have the talents of a mathematical genius and for Matt Damon not to develop it. So yeah, Affleck yells at Matt Damon. They're drinking beers after work, construction site. And he's like, if you don't go and pursue this gift, then this is shameful and make all their friends mad. So what do you think? Should we develop our talents? We have a moral responsibility to do that. Is it immoral not to develop your talents? You be the judge. All right. For Aristotle, ask yourself, is he right? You still have moral questions if you're the last person on earth, for Aristotle. You still have a moral responsibility to live out your formal nature. But do you, if there's no human left on earth, do you have any moral responsibility? Let us know on the discussion board. Pause it, read this, let us know. All right, critiques of Aristotle. Real quick, scientific naturalism, this worldview of naturalism, it's hard to pin your finger on it, but David Papineau, philosophical naturalism, Dan Dennett is by far the best guy to explain this worldview. But if you're a physicalist, you only believe in a physical world, you're not going to believe in substances and so on. If you believe Charles Darwin is right and no God exists, then yeah, there are no natures, there are no ways human beings or oak trees ought to be. So Darwin understood that his view would eliminate these non-physical elements of the biological world. There's no more formal and final causes. All right. Good enough. Let's just quit here. There's my grandma. That house has now been torn down, but Harrison, that was one of my favorite places in the world to hang out. Sit on that porch, which was built in the 1830s, and chew the fat with Grandma and Grandpa. All right, thanks, Grandma, for being in this show. That's Mildred Stone, little Millie. All right, we'll see you guys. Farewell.